Hello, I'm Ben Shirley. I'm going to introduce you to the work we've been doing on the S3A project on accessible object-based audio using narrative importance metadata. So, I seem to have skipped a slide somehow. I skipped a slide. There we go. Okay, so the motivation for this, 1 in 6 people have some degree of hearing impairment. Around 92% of those have mild to moderate hearing impairment, so they do make use of the sound on TV. They're not interested in signing or subtitles and so on. And we've been, a lot of them struggle to understand the meaning of audio-visual content and audio content. So we started from the process of all the previous research has been done on speech is good, everything else is bad. It's potentially a masker, so we need to get rid of it. But actually speech intelligibility is affected by much more than just the speech clarity. If you think about the example of a football game being broadcast on TV, the commentary is quite important to understand what's going on, but actually the referee whistle is absolutely critical to understand what's going on. If you think about a whodunit or a thriller, that gunshot off the screen is actually really important to understand the narrative. So some of the non-speech sounds are actually very narratively important to understand what's going on. And actually balance between the sounds, rather than just the level of the speech, is the most common issue that's been identified with hearing impaired people that we've worked with. So the solution is personalizable broadcast audio, so using object-based audio to personalize based on individual preferences and individual needs. Now the way we've gone about doing this, we have at the production stage a load of object-based media assets, so speech, music, sound effects and so on, and the producer can tag all of these elements with narrative important metadata. So based on how important each object is to understand the story or the narrative of what's happening. At the user end, we've boiled it down to a single dial complexity control, which essentially goes all the way from fully immersive down to just the narratively important elements. And the way it's doing that is by attenuating or giving gain to the different levels of hierarchy of narrative importance, if you like, depending on the user preference. So you turn it all the way down, the less important stuff, the bird song, the traffic noise, gets attenuated a lot, and the speech goes up some. If you've only got it a little way around, it won't go down quite so much. So in order to do that, there's a number of production tools. If you're in a fully object-based workflow, we have, again, the Visor metadata editor, and we've used this so that every object can be tagged with narrative importance metadata, and the renderer will adapt to that and adapt the playback to it. But we're not all entirely object-based just yet, so we have an auditioning tool for semi-object-based workflows where the producer essentially allocates tracks to one of 4 buses based on their narrative importance, and he can audition the effect of that as to what would happen if the user's changing the position of the dial. So that can either go out as multiple stems, or it can the busing choice can be used as tagging for with the metadata. So I've worked with a number of producers on this, one-on-one workshops with several of them. This is the hierarchy of narrative importance for the Turning Forest scene that you all would have heard yesterday, I think. So you can see at the top, the most important, we've got the narrator and the other speech elements. At the bottom, the lowest importance, we have background, atmos, non-essential effects, and so on. And we found that a really useful exercise in going through the individual decisions on that with the producers. We've also run an online survey and an object categorization tasks where producers were presented with an online version of the production tool, so they could allocate narrative importance to different stems, and they could audition that using the tool. We got some really interesting responses from that. So some of them found it really liberating, so they could throw everything at it. They could get the most immersive mix they wanted with whatever levels of music and effects without worrying too much about hearing impaired people, because they could simply turn it down. And at the end of the day, if it means that the content becomes accessible to a wider audience, that can only be a good thing. So the question then comes about, what about the shared viewing experience if you're watching with somebody else? So I've been working with the University of Southampton with the soundbar you may have seen yesterday to give a different experience, different settings for different people in the same environment. We've done some focus groups with that. We've got an ongoing formal evaluation, but hearing impaired people found it extremely empowering to kind of, as they described it, take back control of their listening experience. And finally, if you want to experience this yourself, my colleague Lauren has been working with the BBC, and we're going to have a full version of Casualty, which will be released on the BBC Taster website with the narrative importance control, so full personalisation based on these principles. Thank you very much.